She just wanted to say hello to the pilots.
The flight attendant said no. Rules were rules.
But minutes later, during takeoff, the captain suddenly collapsed. The first officer was alone, scared, and shaking. Nobody knew that the quiet woman in seat 14C could fly a plane better than anyone on board. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The morning was calm at Miami International Airport. The sky was clear and blue. Passengers walked slowly through the gate, holding coffee cups and pulling small suitcases. Among them was a woman named Laura Bennett. She was 45 years old. She wore simple clothes, a gray jacket and jeans. Nobody looked at her twice. She looked like any other tired traveler going home. But Laura was not an ordinary passenger. She had flown airplanes for over 20 years. She had once been a captain for a major airline. She had also trained young pilots how to handle emergencies. Now she worked as a private flight instructor. Today, she was flying only as a passenger. She was going to visit her sister in Chicago. She wanted a quiet trip, nothing more. As she walked toward the gate, she saw the airplane through the big window. It was a large plane, ready for departure. She noticed the cockpit door was open. 2 pilots were sitting inside, checking their instruments. Laura felt a small, familiar feeling in her chest. She missed flying. She missed the cockpit, but she pushed the feeling away. Today she was just a passenger. At the boarding gate, she saw a flight attendant checking tickets. The flight attendant's name tag said, Grace. Grace had a warm smile, but her eyes were sharp and alert. She had worked many years in the airline industry and knew how to watch for anything unusual. Laura walked up slowly and said, "Excuse me. I used to fly planes myself. I saw the pilots are still doing their checks. Would it be possible to say a quick hello before we take off?" Grace's smile stayed on her face, but her eyes changed. She had heard requests like this before. Some people loved airplanes so much that they wanted to see the cockpit. But rules were rules. "I'm sorry," Grace said kindly. "Cockpit access is not allowed for passengers. It is a safety rule. I cannot make an exception, even for a friendly hello." Laura nodded. "I understand completely. Thank you for explaining." She walked to her seat, 14C, near the middle of the plane. She placed her small bag under the seat in front of her and sat down. She looked out the window and watched the ground crew working outside. She thought about her sister waiting in Chicago and about the coffee they would drink together tomorrow morning. The plane filled up with people, families with children, business travelers with laptops, an old couple holding hands. Everyone settled into their seats. The engines started to hum. The safety video played on the small screens above the seats, though most passengers ignored it. Soon, a voice came over the speaker. It was the captain, a man named Robert Hayes. His voice was calm and clear. He explained that the flight time to Chicago would be about 2 hours and 30 minutes. He mentioned some light wind on the way, nothing serious. He thanked everyone for flying with the airline. It was a normal announcement, the kind passengers hear every day and quickly forget. The plane pushed back from the gate. It rolled slowly toward the runway, joining a line of other planes waiting for their turn. Laura watched everything with quiet interest. She noticed small details other passengers never saw. The way the plane turned smoothly, the sound of the engines changing as power increased and decreased. Years of training made her senses sharp, even when she tried to relax. Finally, the plane reached the front of the line. The pilots lined up on the runway. The engines grew louder. The plane began to move forward, faster and faster. Laura felt the familiar push of speed against her body. She smiled a little, remembering all the times she had done this herself, sitting in the front seat instead of the back. The speed increased, 40 knots, 60 knots, 80 knots. The runway lines passed quickly outside the window. Laura's mind, without her even trying, began counting the seconds. She knew the numbers. She knew when the plane should lift into the air. But something felt wrong. The nose of the plane should have lifted by now. It did not. The plane kept rolling, faster and faster, but stayed low to the ground. Laura's heart began to beat faster. She had felt this only once before, many years ago, during a training exercise. A late rotation. It meant something was wrong in the cockpit. Inside the cockpit, First Officer Emma Diaz was fighting panic. Captain Hayes had suddenly grabbed his chest and made a strange sound. Then his body went limp. His hands slipped away from the controls. Emma's mind raced. She had trained for this moment many times in simulators, but nothing could truly prepare a person for the real thing. She grabbed the controls with both hands. The plane was already past the safe point to stop. There was no runway left to abort the takeoff. She had only one choice: fly the plane into the air, alone. She pulled back on the controls, lifting the nose. The wheels left the ground with very little runway to spare. The plane climbed into the sky, shaking slightly as Emma fought to keep it steady. Her hands were trembling. Her mind was split between flying the plane and worrying about her captain, who lay unconscious beside her. For a moment, everything felt unreal to her, like a bad dream she could not wake from. The instruments in front of her blurred slightly as fear tried to take over her thinking. She had practiced emergencies many times in training, but training never prepared her for the sound of her captain's breathing suddenly stopping beside her, or the silence that followed his voice. She forced herself to breathe slowly, remembering the words of her old instructor: fly the plane first, worry later. She checked her altitude, her speed, and her heading, one at a time, forcing her hands to stay steady on the controls, even though her heart was pounding loudly in her ears. Every second felt like a full minute. She knew that somewhere behind her, in the quiet cabin, more than 100 people trusted her completely, without even knowing what was happening just a few feet away from them. That thought alone gave her the strength to keep climbing instead of freezing in fear.
She pressed the radio button. Miami Tower, this is Flight 215. We have an emergency. The captain is unconscious. I am flying the aircraft alone, requesting immediate assistance.
The controller's voice answered quickly, offering help and clearing airspace for her, but Emma could barely process the words. Too many things were happening at once. Back in the cabin, most passengers thought the takeoff had simply been rough. Some blamed the wind. Others didn't notice anything at all. But Laura knew better. She had felt the delay. She had felt the shake in the climb. Something serious was happening in the cockpit, and every second mattered. A flight attendant rushed down the aisle toward the front of the plane. It was Grace, the same woman who had gently refused Laura's request less than an hour earlier. Her calm expression was gone. Her face looked pale and worried. Laura unbuckled her seatbelt immediately, ignoring the seatbelt sign above her head. She stood up and followed Grace toward the front of the cabin. Passengers around her whispered, wondering what was happening, but Laura did not stop to explain. At the front of the plane, Grace was speaking urgently into the intercom phone connected to the cockpit. Her hands were shaking. When she turned and saw Laura standing there, her eyes widened with surprise and confusion. "I need to get in there," Laura said firmly. "I flew commercial airplanes for over 20 years. I trained pilots for emergencies just like this one. I can help." Grace stared at her for a moment, stunned. This was the same calm woman who had asked politely for a quick hello less than an hour ago. Now she stood with complete confidence, speaking like someone used to being in control during a crisis. "The captain collapsed," Grace said quickly. "The first officer is alone up there. She's asking if anyone on the plane has flying experience." "Then let me in, right now." Grace typed the emergency code into the cockpit door panel. Her fingers trembled, but the door clicked open. Laura stepped inside without hesitation. She saw Captain Hayes slumped in his seat, unconscious, held only by his seatbelt. First Officer Diaz sat rigid beside him, gripping the controls tightly, her face covered in sweat, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. Laura spoke in a calm, steady voice. "First Officer, my name is Laura Bennett. I flew for 20 years, including many years as a captain on this same type of aircraft. I am here to help. Let's get the captain out of his seat safely." Emma looked at her with relief so strong it almost brought tears to her eyes. Together, with help from Grace, they carefully moved Captain Hayes out of his seat and into the small space behind the cockpit, where another flight attendant began checking his pulse and breathing. Laura slid into the empty seat. She adjusted it quickly and placed her hands on the controls. It felt strange and familiar at the same time, like returning to a home she had not visited in a while. She looked at the instruments, 6 altitude, speed heading 6, and understood everything in seconds. "Emma," she said calmly, using the first officer's name to build trust immediately. "You did an amazing job getting us into the air. That was the hardest part, and you did it perfectly. Now we're going to work together and bring this plane down safely. I'll fly. You handle communication and checklists. Can you do that?" Emma nodded, her breathing slowing down. "Yes, I can do that." "Good. Let's reduce power and clean up our climb." Laura's hands moved with practiced ease, adjusting the throttles and checking the flaps. The plane steadied, flying smoothly through the clear morning sky. Emma spoke to air traffic control, informing them that a passenger with flying experience was now assisting in the cockpit. Miami Tower cleared them to circle safely while they prepared to return. Laura studied their options quickly. The captain needed urgent medical help. Returning to Miami was the safest choice, since the airport was close and emergency crews could be ready. She made her decision without hesitation. "Miami Tower, this is Flight 215. We are returning for an emergency landing, requesting the longest runway and medical teams ready for a possible heart attack." The controller responded immediately, giving them clear directions back toward the airport. Laura guided the plane through a smooth turn, watching the city appear below them once again. Emma worked through the landing checklist with growing confidence, her earlier panic replaced by focus and teamwork. As they descended, Laura spoke calmly over the intercom to the passengers. "This is Laura Bennett speaking. We are returning to Miami due to a medical emergency involving one of our pilots. The aircraft is flying normally, and we expect to land safely within a few minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Thank you for your patience." Her voice was steady and reassuring. In the cabin, passengers felt calmer, though many were still nervous. Phones lit up as people texted their families, telling them about the sudden change in the flight. The runway came into view. Laura lined up the plane perfectly, adjusting speed and angle with the ease of someone who had done this thousands of times before. The wheels touched the ground so gently that many passengers barely noticed the landing at all. "Beautiful landing," Emma said quietly, relief flooding her voice. Laura smiled. "Great teamwork, Emma. You should be proud of yourself today." They taxied toward the gate, where ambulances and emergency vehicles were already waiting. As soon as the plane stopped, paramedics rushed inside and carefully carried Captain Hayes out on a stretcher. His condition was serious, but he was alive, and doctors would now have the chance to help him. Grace appeared at the cockpit door, her eyes filled with emotion. "Laura, I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't been on this flight, you did everything right earlier today. You followed the rules, because you didn't know who I was. That's exactly how it should work. When the real emergency happened, you remembered me and acted fast. That's what saved this flight, just as much as anything I did." Emma stepped forward and shook Laura's hand firmly. "I was terrified up there, alone with an unconscious captain. But the moment you sat down next to me, I knew everything would be okay." Passengers slowly left the plane, many of them unaware of how close the flight had come to disaster. A few looked toward the cockpit with curiosity, wondering about the calm woman who had spoken over the intercom. Laura stepped off the plane last, carrying her small bag. She thought about the strange twist of the day. An hour earlier, she had been politely denied entry into the cockpit. Now she had just landed the very same plane, saving everyone on board. She called her sister from the airport, laughing softly as she explained why her flight had been delayed. Her sister could hardly believe the story, but she knew Laura would never make up something like this. Later that day, on a new flight, Laura sat quietly in her seat, watching the clouds pass by the window. She thought about Emma, hoping she would recover well from the shock of the day. She thought about Captain Hayes, hoping he would heal and return to flying one day. And deep inside, Laura felt something warm and quiet. All her years of training, all the hours in the simulator, all the emergencies she had studied, they had all led to this one moment. A moment when a simple passenger became exactly what a crew needed most. She had been turned away from the cockpit once that morning.
But when it truly mattered, the door had opened, and she had been ready.